Hey everyone, welcome back to week 5 of ELIS 2601, Childhood Development, Learning, and the Arts. All right, so this week we are focusing on drama. So the focus this week, if you notice in the syllabus, week 5 and week 6 are described as a learning unit called explorations, and we're focusing on connections, transitions, and drama education or performative arts or pretend play in early childhood classrooms. So, in a brief recap, you remember the course is structured in a way that we have three sort of overarching units of study. So in our first 2 weeks, we focused on movements, and this idea of movements is looking at stages of development, but we're looking at that through the lens of music and dance. And then, of course, in week 3 and week 4, our focus was reflection. So we're thinking about reflective practice, we're digging into reflective practice, but we're also thinking about learning differences in our students, and we're thinking about visual arts and design and the role of architecture in the learning process. So classroom as teacher, for instance. And we just wrapped that up with week 4 in your scale models. So last week, you spent a lot of time and effort into doing some research on inclusive classrooms and learning spaces. And so some of you chose to create scale models of a classroom. Some of you chose to create scale models of outdoor learning environments. And some of you chose to create scale models of other kinds of learning environments. This week will be the first week that we're taking a break from submitting your assignment through YouTube. And so this week we're thinking more kind of in paper form. So we're going to begin using a lesson plan format that you're going to be very familiar with as you move through your program. You may have used this lesson plan format before, and if not, there are lots of kind of areas that we want to focus on in this lesson plan format. I will be attaching this lesson plan format for your review. It may be more of a lesson plan than you've previously done, but do understand that through the remainder of your preclinical courses and as you transition into student teaching, you'll be using this lesson plan format. So it's called Lesson Plan Format 1, and it is your starting point for creating sort of the most robust lesson plan. And you'll be using this for your assignment this week. Your assignment this week is called Performing My Future. And this is an assignment where you are developing a lesson plan for students to use performative or drama-based techniques to think about future careers. And part of that assignment is you're going to be recognizing and acknowledging the importance of the learning community in a young child's life. And so they're going to be interviewing a family member in that process. And before we get to a complete description of the assignment, I want to kind of step back, and we've talked about a recap of the um, different sort of learning modules or overarching ideas that cover weeks 1 through 6. And now that we're in our final idea group explorations and thinking about connections and transitions, I want to talk a little bit about the readings you'll be doing this week. So this week, similar to last week, I have you reading 3 separate pieces. Rather than reading 2 big chunky pieces, I'm trying to cover multiple sort of points. So one of the things that we're thinking about this week is social and emotional development. So this week you'll be reading chapter 9 from the online textbook, from one of the online textbooks we've been using. And chapter 9 focuses on social and emotional development in early childhood learners specifically. And then next week we'll be learning about middle childhood social and emotional development. So you'll be reading the companion chapter to this chapter next week. So we're finishing up this section of learning, thinking about social and emotional development explicitly. But this week, we're focusing especially on our youngest learners. And so, chapter 9 focuses on things like the social construction of gender, the differences in parenting styles, and the role of stress on children's social and emotional development. So, those are a few points in that reading that I want you to pay particular attention to, and particularly thinking about the construction of families, which is a conversation that will continue in next week's reading in chapter 12. And but as we think about community and we think about the role of children's learning experiences outside of school, this chapter really helps to sort of situate social and emotional development in the big picture. And so if our concern is thinking about making connections between school and home, this chapter does a good job of kind of demonstrating how there are lots of different sociocultural influences on children's social and emotional development. Your next reading, after reading about social and emotional development, and I want you to read that first. If you read these in order, it helps connect the dots a little better. Again, it's up to you what order you read them in, but as you probably noticed from last week, I had the readings sequenced in a way that um, I feel makes them make sense in context together better. So if this were a textbook, these would be the chapters in order. Since this is an online course and you can access them in whichever order you download them, um, hypothetically, you can read them out of sequence. You'll still get the information, but the kind of narrative that I'm trying to tell doesn't necessarily come across in the same way. And I really believe that if you'll start by reading about social and emotional development with young children, it helps set the stage, so to speak, since we're thinking about drama education, for the next reading. So your next reading is about pretend play, and the author there is making an argument for structured pretend play. In previous learning in our class, we've talked about the importance of play and how play is so crucial to children's development. There's no question at this particular point in our class whether or not play is important, but in this specific reading, the author is making the argument that structured pretend play and guided pretend play has particular value for early childhood learning. And so, again, if you read this second, then our final piece is that community connection. So, um, we've talked a lot about different kinds of school settings. We've talked about city schools. We've talked about suburban schools, and this reading is looking at rural schools. I can't predict where you're going to work in the future, but what I can hope is that you understand the importance and the value of arts integration into your elementary classroom, whether you're working in a large city, you're working in a suburb, or you're working in a remote area. And in Northeast Ohio, the chances are that you could be working in any of those, right? So we have very large city schools, we have lots of suburban schools, and we have lots of rural schools. And even if you don't stay within this area, that's the case for all of the United States. We have such an incredibly rich and diverse array of school settings that you could be working in. And so I feel that it's really important to give attention to research that's been done in each of these school settings. And so this is our first official reading that looks at community arts in a rural setting, and particularly looks at things like attendance to performing arts events and things like that. And this is a program that's called Windows on a Wider World, or WOW. And this is actually conducted in rural Texas. And this is talking about the value for early childhood education in particular. And so I have this in here as we think about community partnerships. For your assignment this week, remember that you are thinking about community partnerships again in an explicit way. And so I thought that this third reading, while it's not a big, heavy, meaty research reading, it demonstrates some key findings from a long-term research project, and it really puts in context what's possible in a rural education setting. Very often, rural educators are frustrated because they have a lack of uh, access to a variety of educational opportunities within their school. But this underscores the potential for community partnerships in particular. We very often think of community partnerships as being something that's only possible when you have a large community. But this particular program, this Windows on a Wider World, demonstrates that you don't have to be in a huge community to leverage really important partnerships and to create great opportunities for elementary age learners. So that's a summary of your 3 readings. Again, if you read them in order, I think it helps to kind of sequence your thinking for the other things that you're doing. Now, for this week, last week we did another make project that utilized technology that you may use in your future classroom. So we constructed another Padlet. This week we're going back to making with our hands. So last week your major assignment required you to do a little bit of hands-on thinking. This week, your major assignment will be working with lesson plan format 1 to create this lesson. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. So since we're doing something that's purely on paper and we're not doing any video this week, I thought I want to still keep you in that creative mode. I want to still keep you thinking about your own sort of creative practice and using your hands and using your mind and thinking out of the box and thinking about what you could create for your future elementary classroom. So your make assignment this week is, as you're thinking about your lesson plan that you're going to develop, for students to think about future careers using performative or drama-based education standards. I am going to ask you to make a future career costume element. So your make assignment this week is that you are making a costume element for yourself for a future career. Now you may be thinking, I know my future career. I'm going to be an amazing early childhood educator. I'm going to be a second grade teacher. I don't need to make a special costume element for that. Now, remember though, that so much of what we do is to demonstrate as part of teaching. So we are embodying our expectations for our students. So in your lesson plan, what you're going to be doing is donning a costume element to show an alternate future career. So perhaps for your alternate future career, your costume element will be for a scientist or for a attorney or for a civil engineer. So whatever it is that your future costume element would be, I want you to develop a costume element and I want you to take a picture of yourself in that costume element and include that picture in your lesson plan. So in your lesson plan format 1, you're going to be including any kind of materials you're going to use, like if you're going to include a book in your lesson plan, or if you're going to include a video, you'll include those at the end of the lesson plan. The other thing that you're going to put at the end of lesson plan format 1 is your photo of your future costume element. So all I want you to do is find your future costume element in your existing wardrobe, or make a costume element using materials you have around your house. Maybe it's a special hat, maybe it's a special name badge, or maybe it's a special item that you would wear based on a specialized job function. You're going to wear that costume element, take a picture of yourself with your mobile device in your bathroom mirror or in a full-length mirror, or have somebody else in your household take a photo of you. So you can either do it as a selfie that shows the costume element, or you can have another person take a full-length photo of you. But whatever the case, include that JPEG image at the end of your Microsoft Word document. So when you submit your lesson plan format 1 to Blackboard at the end of the week, if I scroll down, I should see a photo of you from your make assignment at the end of the lesson plan. Okay, so that gets us through the readings. It gets us through the make assignment. And now let's talk about the assignment itself, the performing my future assignment. I want to talk a little bit about the discussion board briefly. Um, but your make assignment is you are using lesson plan format 1, and you're going to create a lesson plan for either kindergarten or first grade. The choice is yours. It's up to you. If you want to do kindergarten or first grade, pick which grade and stick with it. And then I want you to look at the Ohio Drama Education Standards for young students and look at those education standards. Pick one standard. Don't go crazy. I don't want you to spend too much time on this, but I want you to find a drama education standard that fits this lesson. So before you decide in advance, I'm going to pick a standard and make the lesson plan fit it, I want you to instead reverse process it, okay? You're finding an education standard, but that might be the last thing you do. I generally start with the other question. And if you look at the assignment description, I've asked you to think about the outcomes for this. So, what do you want them to know at the end? Well, what you want them to know at the end is what are positive characteristics of role models, and you also want them to think about future careers, and you want them to interview a family member. So you have them speaking with the family member about careers, you have them identifying positive role model characteristics, and you have them thinking about a future job. So those are your learning outcomes. If you know in advance that you want them to do some version of that, and maybe not exactly as I'm wording it, but however you would teach it. So roughly speaking, you are aiming for those things. If you start with that and then work your way backward to think about the steps that you're going to have the students take, then you can look at the drama education standards and pick a drama education standard that speaks to the lesson that you're having them do. So whether that is that you are developing a lesson to have them role play as a future career, or that they are doing some other performative thing where they are performing or acting related to the future career or related to the interview. So perhaps they take on the role of the person that they interviewed as part of this. But there can be lots of different portions to how you construct this lesson. Again, the choice is yours. Think about the reading level and the ability level. If we think about cognitive and physical development that we've talked about earlier in this class, think about what's on target for kindergarten and first. So don't have them, don't ask your kindergartners to write a paragraph. Again, we want to make sure this is developmentally on target. And we want to make sure that this helps them identify positive role model characteristics, future career goals, and to have an opportunity to have a meaningful interaction with a family member at home. Those are the key points I want included in the lesson plan. Whether you want to include music, or you want to include video, or you want to include books, or you want to include other supplies, or you want to incorporate the costume element part of it into your lesson plan, is up to you. Maybe you're wearing a future costume element to introduce the lesson, or maybe you're having students create their own costume elements as part of the lesson. That's up to you. Again, I want to give you parameters to work with, and I want to give you goals, but I don't want to spoon feed you what your lesson plan should be. So you've got some wiggle room in there in how this lesson plan is constructed. I just want to see you step through lesson plan format 1 and complete it to the best of your ability to cover the areas that you're asked to sort of fill in, and to include an image of your make activity at the end of that. Again, one drama education standard is sufficient. You do need to think also about, as you are constructing this lesson, you do need to think carefully about student materials, teacher materials, your procedures. Again, Write this so that if I was a substitute teacher, I would have a general idea of how to teach this lesson. Make sure that you are saying all the steps that you want to go through with the students. And then also, you need to have a plan for documentation and assessment. How are you going to find out if they have achieved their learning goals? Are you going to create a verbal quiz? Are you going to create a paper quiz? Are you going to do a pre assessment and a post assessment? Are you going to assess based on observational data, or are you going to assess based on verbal feedback? Are you going to assess based on performance? If the students perform the lesson or they do the dramatic activity that you built in, and that's the primary form of assessment. Whatever your goal for assessment is, make sure you state it clearly and make sure that what you're assessing are your stated learning goals. So those two should always connect. And in between there, I like to think of this as kind of the triangle of a good lesson plan. We've got assessment, we've got learning goals, and we've got the state standard. And all three of those should seem to have clear connections. If you've written a good lesson plan, you start out with your stated goals. What are they going to know at the end? And your assessment will verify that. And your learning standard shows that they are moving towards the state expectation, right? So that's it for the Performing My Future lesson. And in thinking about the discussion board here, I'm going to ask you, this last week I asked you to connect elements of your 3 readings and then to pose a question. We'll be following a similar format this week. So my expectation for the discussion board again this week is that you are going to be connecting some elements from the emotional development reading, the pretend play reading, and the community arts Windows on a Wider World reading. And then you're going to pose a question for your classmates to gently remind you, because a few people I think were a little confused this last week. You get 6 points for your initial post on the discussion board. And your initial post should address the things I've asked you to do, which is to pull an element from each reading and pose a question. So if you've got those 3 points from the reading and you've got the question to your peers, you get the full 6 points. Now, your other 4 points of the weekly 10 points available for the discussion board come from 2 substantive responses. Your 2 responses this week, just like last week, need to be answering the questions that your classmates have posed. So if your classmate poses a question related to drama education, go back into your readings and look for the answer. These are not necessarily meant to be opinion-based answers. You should support your answers with research. So look for the answers within the readings. If your classmate, for instance, asks a question such as, how could different parenting styles affect the emotional development of small children? You can go back to the Chapter 9 reading and look for a direct answer to respond to that. So now that I've posed that question's off the table. But you see how you can pose a question that is based from one of the 3 pieces, and then your classmates can find that answer. Now, you're welcome to supplement your research-based answer with opinion and say, well, in this reading it says blah, blah, blah. And I agree with that to an extent, but I also think X, Y, or Z. So you can connect it to additional ideas that you have, but you need to answer the question from research. So again, I think there was a little bit of fuzziness about how we handled that last week. And I really want to clarify this week. We're repeating that format because I think it's an important exercise to help you make substantial connections with the things you're reading. We're connecting the readings within the assignments, but I also want to make sure that our discussion board is very research oriented. I really want our discussions in Blackboard to mirror what we would do in the class. If we were meeting in a face-to-face class, what I would do is we would talk a little bit about what we had read, and I would present a little bit of information about what we had read, such as what I'm doing right now. And then I would ask you questions about those readings. So I would effectively be doing what you're doing. What you're doing is pulling 3 key points from your readings and posing a question. And that's ultimately our goal in a classroom setting, is that we want to kind of bring our knowledge to the table, ask questions, learn new things, and we're learning from each other. So this is our opportunity to have peer learning in the absence of a face-to-face classroom. If you're wondering why I set it up last week that way and this week that way, it's because I really want to make sure that as we leave here, that we feel comfortable with engaging with these kinds of readings analytically. Because as you go further into your pre-service training and you're out there doing those preclinical learning opportunities in an early childhood classroom, you're going to be focused on tested subject matter. And it would be easy to forget about the crucial importance of keeping all these developmental factors in mind. It would be easy to forget about the importance of arts integration and the multiple ways that we can integrate art meaningfully, not only into tested subject areas, but also into transitional activities, into community-based partnerships, and connecting learning between home and school, or out in the world and school. Remember, John Dewey is very interested in that. As an educational philosopher and one of the greatest 20th century American educational philosophers, Dewey's progressive education wasn't about saying, let's just look at the things that we can measure inside a classroom. Dewey said, we've got to be learning in context. We've got to be learning in the community. And learning needs to be inquiry-based. It needs to be based in asking questions and solving problems in real-world settings. So, as much as it's important to acknowledge that some subjects in the elementary classroom are tested, it's also crucial that we recognize that taught in isolation and taught in a bubble, those things lose their context and applicability to real-world settings. And to bridge that gap, we bring in play, we bring in classroom as teacher, we bring in the arts, and we bring in the community. And so, but we only bring that in if we remember this research in context, if we understand that we have decades and decades of research to support the importance of arts integration, community partnerships, and play. So there is method to my thinking and restructuring our discussion boards, and my hope is that this stuff will remain sticky and you'll be able to pull this research in as you progress through your program and as you get out there into the classroom. So that if you have an administrator that asks the question, why are you bringing people from the community into the school? Why are you doing that? Why are the kids doing a visual art project in the cafeteria? Why are your students singing and dancing in the library? You're going to be able to support why they're doing that with all this research that we've been talking about and additional research that you've been conducting along the way. So that's my logic for what we're doing this week. Again, the focus here is thinking through just exploration. So we're really kind of pushing ourselves. Initially, we are moving, and then we're reflecting. Now we're exploring. I want you to go out. You are an explorer. So our next 2 weeks focus on that notion of exploration through performative and drama-based learning. And so I'm really excited to see your lesson plans. I know some of you are excited to have a break from YouTube, probably. As a fair warning, your final lesson, if you've been looking ahead at the syllabus, your final lesson, Acts of Empathy, you will be doing a transitional act next week that will go on YouTube. But this week, you have a break from YouTube other than watching this video. So, and I hope to see some interesting discussions. I hope that our discussion flows a little better this week. And I'm looking forward to seeing your costume elements for your future career. And I think that's going to be really fun. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you approach lesson plan format 1. I know some of you may be familiar with it. For those of you who are not, take it step by step. Again, my plan of approach is generally to start with the learning outcomes and then to think through the materials and procedures and then loop back to learning standards. Again, make sure that your assessments and outcomes are connected and you are good to go. All right, best wishes, and I hope that you have some amazing explorations this week.